AA Best Bail Bonds. Big game coverage live from Las Vegas. Powered by Southern Recipe Small Batch Pork Rinds, Synergenics, and 94.1 San Antonio Sports Star.
Hey, huddle up around us. This is 94.1 San Antonio Sports Star. He's RJ Ochoa, the managing editor of Blogging the Boys. I am Rob Thompson. My new title today is Professor-in-Chief, but I'm just a lowly radio host sitting on Media Row. Always brought to you by AA Best Bail Bonds, Synergenics, and Southern Recipe Small Batch Pork Rinds. We are honored, and I do mean honored, but we are joined by Kaylyn Kahler. You know her from The Athletic. Great pieces throughout the league, and a genuine honor to finally meet you face-to-face. Been reading your stuff for a while.
Thanks, guys. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for coming by.
Happy Super Bowl week.
What is the best thing you've had to eat so far?
Oh, my gosh. I really haven't had any meals out yet or at any restaurants. Okay. So you're catching me literally just having free meals so far. So the best free meal that I've had was media night last night. It was actually pretty good. They had a good, tacos, carnitas, spread.
Did you have a plantain?
I did.
Were you surprised that there were plantains at the Super Bowl media party?
I was. It's not something that you see.
Not all.
So we thought they were chicken wings.
They did look like chicken.
Thank you. Okay, that's all I was looking for was justification.
They did kind of look like chicken wings.
It was rather unexpected. Your thoughts on what media night has become, or Monday Night Live, or whatever they call it now?
Yeah, I mean it's like a big circus, and actually, it took me until last year. I didn't used to go to it. I would kind of show up midweek, Wednesday, for when the team availabilities actually started. This year, actually, they're doing a team availability today, which is nice. But I used to come midweek, and then last year I realized it's actually great access if you just avoid the craziness of trying to get people at a podium or trying to surround Travis Kelce. I walked by Travis Kelce's stop yesterday, and I was like, okay, no. There was a huge crowd. There were people with signs. I don't even know what the signs said because I didn't stay long enough to look. It was probably an interesting scene, but if you find the assistant coaches, it's great access to assistant coaches. And you guys know that's not very easy to get during the season with these teams. And especially, for example, I talked to an assistant quarterbacks coach yesterday. You could never do that during an NFL season. Maybe if you make a special request to the team, they might let you, but most of them won't because they'll be we just don't make these guys available. Right. They're not required to. So if you avoid the, Blue Man Group is walking around, that was, I just find that really annoying because I'm I'm trying to do a job here. Right. But it's Super Bowl week. I understand. This is entertainment. It's fine. But if you avoid all of that, you can actually have some really productive conversations with people that are less popular.
It's weird how everything's kind of hiding in plain sight. To your point, the Blue Man Group is camouflage for the easy points of accessibility. So when you write a story, I imagine, because it takes me a long time to read them and process them because they're incredible. But I imagine it takes
Sorry about that.
It's a good
long form piece is an art form. Yeah.
I imagine it takes months on end, and I imagine you've got notebooks, and I just envision this just kind of It's Always Sunny meme, kind of processing and cross-referencing and things like that. So a night like Monday night, do you go into it saying okay, I have an hour and I want to talk to X, Y, and Z, and it's a little bit different than maybe a standard conversation that you could have on the phone or whatever. It must be a little different level of pressure on you.
Yeah, I spent my whole plane ride yesterday, which was I'm from Chicago, so it was almost 4 hours. I spent the whole plane ride getting my notebook out, writing down exactly who I was trying to find, what I needed to ask them, trying to be as organized as possible. But I have this terrible habit where I start interviewing someone and I don't look at my notes. So then later, I'm why did I write all this down? I mean, it helps to write it down, I think, because it gets it in your memory. But there'll be at least 2 or 3 questions that I completely forgot to ask. And then I'm gosh, dang it. And I get really mad at myself. But, yeah, I spent the whole plane ride, plotting out what I was going to do and my plan. And I was really mostly working on a Niners thing. So I didn't really have, a very detailed plan for the Chiefs. I was just kind of let's just float around and, see who's available. But, yeah, the hardest part is, identifying these guys. Because, the coaches, they had a bunch of stools set up that they were, I think, supposed to make it to. But it was on the whole other side. So then they would have to walk all the way around. And, people were stopping them before they got there. And so you really just had to be okay. And they're not wearing anything. They're just wearing. And the Super Bowl sweats this year are
Thank you.
Drab and dull.
They're Costco
great.
Kirkland brand. That's all they are.
Yeah, it's really a weird fashion choice. And so I thought they were very hard to find in the crowd of people because there were no colors.
And they at least gave us a roster with numbers, but no one had numbers on last night. So they had some pictures in the dark to stumble around when we were getting them. And I noticed last night, of course, the media throng, Kansas City and, Mahomes and Kelsey and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, the draw was there, and they were the first coming in for the night, and the crowds were huge. Once they dispersed in the way that the opening night goes, the Chiefs came out, they leave, and then the teams themselves kind of gather together for kind of a mutual presser while the fans wait, and then the 49ers come in an hour later. So now we're about 3.5 hours in by the time the 49ers arrived, and a lot of people had already left. The 49ers seem to be caught in the draft of the Kansas City juggernaut. And I said you said you were writing a story on the 49ers. How is this a good thing for the 49ers right now? Because they're the second thought. They're the second act. They're the closing act. We talk about Reed first, and then we go to Kyle if he's free or available kind of stuff. Is that beneficial to them? Are they looking at it that way?
Yeah, I think they are. And, I think in sports we love underdog stories. And it's weird to call the Niners an underdog because they're really not by any sense of the word. They are a stacked team, and they've had success consistently over the last, over Shanahan's tenure there. Really, they've barely had a down year. But, Brock Purdy is an underdog. He is the underdog. So I think, I think they probably are looking at it that way because the Chiefs are here to defend their title. The Niners, they do. You can't say they have nothing to lose because they have a lot to lose. They want to win that game. They've lost to the Chiefs once before, 2020. So they don't want to be in that position again. But I do think you're right about that sense of Brock Purdy is the definition of underdog. This is a Mr. Irrelevant. If he won a Super Bowl, that would be a really cool storyline. And I know that he infuriates a lot of people with his style of play and, the way that he can just scramble very slowly for a first down. And it's he's the complete opposite, really, of what Patrick Mahomes is. But he's here. And I think that's a testament to what Kyle Shanahan has built and what they're doing there on offense and on defense as well. They're really strong. So I think it's going to be it's a really different matchup than 2020. And I think it's going to be really interesting. So
you mentioned you have a Niners story, and I want to get there. But something like the Brock Purdy of it all, and there's a lot of discourse. That's putting it lightly. Is that too low-hanging fruit for you? It's Mr. Irrelevant.
It's obvious,
it's just been talked about ad nauseum, and it's remarkable, but it is kind of old at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't written specifically about Brock yet, and I don't know what I'll be writing out of the Super Bowl, so that'll be sort of in development. But I do think it's always an interesting storyline. He wasn't here for the Niners the last time they were in this game, so as far as the Super Bowl goes, he is new, and honestly, he hasn't been starting for that long. He started 4 games last year.
Yeah, well, and he didn't even lose one until the title game when he was knocked out.
Until he got hurt. And so, he was brand new on the scene last year, and it feels like he's been around for a lot longer at this point. But he still is actually a very new figure. And, the way he dresses, the way I think he shares an apartment with a teammate, all of that is very low key and kind of endearing. And so I do think he probably will end up. If it wasn't for Travis Kelce, I think Brock would probably be the sweetheart of the Super Bowl.
She is Kaylyn Kahler, senior writer with The Athletic, and you're talking about the 49ers and the Kyle Shanahan and the lineage, the Shanahan family. The Shanahan name in the NFL has been around for a while, and he was brought up as a coach and coaching coaches and doing all that kind of stuff. And your work with Kyle Shanahan, tell us about how he manages his team.
Yeah, so the connection with Mike is really interesting because Kyle, as a head coach, has obviously taken a lot from his dad, and Mike has a lot of coaches that have come out of his tree, and now Kyle has his own tree with Robert Saleh in New York, Mike McDaniel with the Dolphins, and now Houston, DeMeco Ryans. So it's really interesting to see this tree kind of spread, and we know their offense. We know, the wide zone run game, West Coast offense. We know that Shanahan style of offense that originated with Bill Walsh way back when. With the Niners. But the interesting thing that I'm writing about that has been sort of written about just in a couple sentences here and there, it appears in stories, and I actually got the idea from a Jets story about the Jets quarterback room. The lead of the story was Robert Saleh was in his own office, his personal office, and he had a screen in front of him, and he was able to listen to the quarterback's meeting room. And the quarterbacks weren't even in an official meeting. They were chatting after a meeting. And he was listening in on their post-meeting chat, which also did still happen to be about football. So it wasn't it didn't seem very invasive. But I read that and I was that's really weird.
It's disconcerting.
Can you imagine your bosses like having a camera in your office at all times? I mean, I guess radio is live, so they're listening.
But we're looking for the red light to make sure it's off.
Yeah, but like when you're not on the air, they're like listening in all the time. And so I asked someone, okay, how did Robert get this idea? And they're like, oh, it came from Kyle. And then I'm like, well, where did Kyle get the idea? It came from Mike. Mike was doing this in Denver in the 90s, which is crazy because I'm like, how did that technology exist? But it was kind of like a CCTV, like security camera type of thing. He could pick between the audio of the different rooms. And so I'm like, all right, I need to just talk to people who've coached with him, see if they think it's weird. Because we think it's weird, but it turns out most people who have coached for A. Shanahan, Mike, or Kyle are very into this. Like, they're like, yeah, we just assume we're always, or who have played for them, they just assume they're always being recorded. A couple players last night did say, like Trent Williams was like, he's always listening. It's kind of like being on Big Brother. And so that is part of it. Like, you have to know, like, you're always getting watched. Whatever you say is going to be heard. But, people, the majority of them find it to be helpful because, especially the coaches, because they're like, we can self-scout after the season. They can watch things back. And then there's a bunch of anecdotes in my story about, like, Mike jumping into a meeting that people were having to fix something in real time. John Embry, who is the assistant head coach and tight ends coach now in Miami, he told a story in Washington where him and Kyle were arguing about how they should block the backside of a run. And Kyle ended up agreeing with him. And then 30 seconds later, because Kyle was the offensive coordinator at the time, 30 seconds later, Mike comes bursting into the room, and he's like, no, we're not doing it this way. We're not doing it this way. And John was like, whoa, okay. So things like that are happening. And then, like, Brandon Allen, the third-string quarterback with the Niners. So I didn't get to ask Brock about this because I was not going to fight the crowd in front of him. But Brandon Allen, who's a third-string quarterback in San Francisco right now, he said they called a screen in their room the voice of God because Kyle's voice will just come in to their quarterback room when he's not in there to, like, give them a note.
There's so many issues I have with that, but you can't argue with success. And if people are walking away with it going, it's no big deal, right. I give it a little bit more credence. But my first thought is, you're doing what to win? Yeah. And then what about the players and the union side of this? There's some issues in here that I think.
The interesting thing is, that's a good point. It hasn't run yet. It's running tomorrow. Maybe I should call the union today to be like, do you guys have an issue with this? But actually, a player on the 2010 Commanders team, that was right before the lockout. The lockout was happening the next summer. He told me that they did have an NFLPA meeting, and they're able to. I should have said this earlier. They, with Mike and with Kyle, because now Kyle is doing it on Zoom, so you can mute the Zoom.
Interesting.
If you want to, you can mute it. You have, like, the coaches have the control of that if they want to. And Mike, before Zoom days, he had a light switch on the wall, where you could turn the audio off.
So there's some,
or you could turn the dial down. Yeah. So when the NFLPA came in to have this meeting with the players, they were like, all right, we got to make sure, like, we're not being recorded here so that the coaches don't have an influence. So there is a little bit of, like, free choice there. But, like, some coaches told me, like, oh, I never bother. I just, it's fine.
I'm just astounded that Kyle, who has a number of responsibilities, has the time. Like, I don't have time to listen to, like, every podcast I want to listen to.
I know.
Like, how can he focus while listening? And does he have a schedule of, like, when he jumps in here or there, whatever? Like, that in and of itself is fascinating.
So it's like, it's hard to understand because the head coaches will say that it makes them more efficient. Because I didn't actually talk to Kyle for this story, but I did talk to Gary Kubiak, who coached for Mike, coached with Kyle. Actually, Kyle coached under him in Houston when he became a head coach. And Gary said that he took this and he did sort of like a light version of it where he just had it in his 3 big meeting rooms for special teams, defense, and offense.
That makes sense.
And so, because those are like the meetings, you can't be in all 3 of those. Usually on an NFL schedule, they're all happening at the same time. So you can't go to all 3 of those meetings as a head coach, so you can listen to all 3 at the same time and chime in. So that part makes sense. But yeah, I don't know how you would have time to, like, go through everything. So I think they multitask. Like, I think the coach is in his office and he's doing whatever, like, head coaching things he needs to get done. He's got, it's like listening to a podcast while you're working. It's sort of similar to that. So yeah, but it is, like, crazy. Because then I just asked Norv Turner, who has head coached in, like, 3 different teams. I just asked him, hey, did you ever do this? And he was like, no, I was way too busy to be doing that. So you'll hear, like, the same different arguments from different people. And when you talk to coaches, outside of the Shanahan tree, just presenting them with this idea, they're like, that's weird. Like, the people on the outside think it's weird. But I will say with COVID, 2020, the COVID protocol, a lot of the meetings had to be held. If you couldn't, like, physically distance, you put everything virtually. And so a lot of coaches were joining into each other's meetings. on Zoom. So I think that technology
accelerated this whole. Yeah, sure.
It was like the next evolution of what Kyle and Mike had already been doing, and now I think you'll find coaches outside of the Shanahan tree who do this now because of COVID and the Zoom.
Yeah, there is a little bit more comfortability of having a camera and a microphone on in a random place. I think we're more accustomed to. But the idea that the forward-thinking Shanahan is doing that seems so relative to constraining old-school ideas. You'll do how I coach, as I coach. I'm going to listen to you, coach. Sounds really interesting, progressive, not progressive for what I believe to be a very progressive coach.
Yeah, and I think, too, like I asked players if they noticed a difference, like when they played somewhere else that didn't do this. And Logan Paulson, who is a tight end for Kyle and Mike, he was in San Francisco for Kyle's first year, and then he had played in Washington for Mike. He said when he played for like 3 other teams that were outside the Shanahan tree, and he said he noticed like right away, like things were not consistent. Like he'd be in a meeting with the offensive line coach, and he would explain something, but like not fully explain it. And then the offensive coordinator, who wasn't in the meeting, didn't know that meeting hadn't gone well. And then he's retreading the same stuff, but it hadn't gone well. And so no one's understanding things. And so like the details aren't lining up. And so as weird and like surveillance-y as it is, and it does, there are people who are rubbed the wrong way by it.
Sure.
But majority of them are like, this is fine. But it does, the end result is that you can make sure that everyone is saying the same thing, which can be a problem on coaching staffs.
It makes sense how his staff would be so prominent and everyone's well organized and ready and equipped for opportunities that come their way. You've written extensively about a lot of things, including the Cowboys analytics staff. And that's a weird topic in my world because Mike McCarthy is such a polarizing figure, especially when it comes to analytics, because people remember his opening press conference and, it just, conversations go sideways. I don't think people regard the Cowboys as an analytically forward organization. People just kind of view them as the Cowboys of it all. I don't really have a question as much as I'm just curious for your kind of 30,000-foot thoughts on them.
Yeah, well, I wrote that story because you're right. Like Mike is very polarizing, and it's particularly when it comes to his clock management,
right?
And which is a branch of analytics. It's like weird. Defining analytics is really impossible. It's like 7 different things, but like clock management is one of those things that falls into the bucket of it. And so I wrote this story because I noticed they had really expanded their analytics staff this summer. They had gotten rid of Tom Robinson, who was previously in charge for like 20 years of their analytics. And they had a couple consultants who like worked under him, and I think like maybe one staffer. And so all of those people had left. Some of them left because they wanted to.
Right.
Some of them they moved on from. And so they replaced them with a team with John Park, who's now the director of analytics there, and he came from Indianapolis, and he was able to hire, I think, 4 people under him. So they have like a 5-person staff now, which puts them on the high end of analytics staffs in the NFL. Comparatively, like baseball teams have like 40, but for football, that's a lot.
This is still the Stone Age. Right.
Having 5 is a pretty good number. So I wanted to see if like, when I wrote it mid-season, I was like, what? I was trying to figure out what the impact of this analytics staff was on the team, and it's really hard to tell mid-season. You almost need like 5 years to be like, this is what they've done, right? And like the Cowboys have drafted well, so they're just probably just going to add to the efficiency with their drafting. But I wanted to know in game like what was going on, and so essentially my conclusion, was that Mike. I mean, I'm on a tangent now, but Mike getting rid of Kellen Moore and being like, we're going to run the ball more, but then he actually just passed more than Kellen had, actually. And so it seemed like that was a good thing during the season when they were having success. And I actually thought that might be the analytics staff's influence because they were passing on early downs more than they had with Kellen Moore, which is a sign of analytics influence. When you pass on early downs. So I was like, oh, that might be something. They were using motion more than they had before. Which also is just a very like analytically sound thing for an offense. Like use motion, shows you what the defense is doing. That is like something you can do to have success. So there were a couple areas where like I felt like that was possibly the analytics influence. But my larger question was like, is this going to be the year that Mike finally figures it out and like the Cowboys are going to go farther than they have? And honestly, I don't know that last game says anything about.
No, it didn't offer. It didn't offer an opportunity to evaluate that. To your point,
right? And I was hoping it would be a close game. It would come down to some 2-minute decisions, and But I mean, there's nothing. I haven't even rewatched that game because I'm just like I don't even know what there is to see here. Like this is
I mean, I'm with you, and it was so out of character, out of out of the box for what they'd been, and defied everything about who they had been. To your point, that I always thought McCarthy's run the ball comment was taken a little out of context because of how polarizing he is, and so he offered that Kayln wanted to light up the scoreboard, and people just again ripped on him for that, and and people drag him for the initial I built a front office in my barn, whatever, and so like nobody will evaluate him fairly, which is why we appreciated you offering that, because that had never really been done.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk to him for the story just to be like, what are you actually doing now with analytics?
That's a good question.
I was surprised. I talked to someone who worked for him in Green Bay. His name's Mike Ayers. He's considered like the grandfather of football analytics. He like invented a bunch of metrics that we use now before they even really had anything. And he was actually interesting because he was like, you know what, Mike, like they were kind of advanced in Green Bay in the early days of his Green Bay tenure. But then he also said something that I think explains a lot about Mike now, which was that, like I brought up, I can't remember what game it was now, 2014, maybe NFC title game, Packers, Seahawks. And he kicked 2 field goals in the fourth quarter from like the 1 yard line, which now coaches would not do that. Right. Like you would not see that decision being made. And Mike Ayers was like, I was like, how would you talk him through situational things like that? Like when you analyze it the next day, because he said Mike would have him go look and see, okay, historically, what happened when a team did this? Did they win or lose? Like win probability. And Mike Ayers said something that like would make analytics people of today like riot, because he was like, we're seeing like a 4 or 5% win probability increase or decrease, and he's like, that's not really that significant. But analytics people today would be like, that's huge.
Right.
Like, each of those decisions adds up. So like you basically lost like 8% win probability in the first quarter for those 2 field goal choices, which ended up,
being consequential.
So when Mike Ayers said that, I felt like it explained a lot about how Mike McCarthy makes choices now, which is like he's not, and it's good to not just like look at the numbers and be like, this is what the book tells me to do, we're going to do that. Like you do need to put it into context, but I do think that like Mike's football side, his coach intuition probably wins out more than the numerical analysis does, and I think that's like what it comes down to with him. And I wanted to see him put into that position again. So
not anytime soon, at least for the next couple of months.
Yeah,
she is Kaylyn Kahler. She is the senior writer with The Athletic, sitting in with us here on San Antonio Sports Star.
This is an interesting week in that it ultimately decides narratives, which defy objective data and facts in a lot of ways. So is that frustrating for you? Because that's generally, from my vibe from reading you, is you lay out facts and draw conclusions, but this is the kind of polarizing thing that, Brock Purdy won the Super Bowl, Brock Purdy defeated Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl, and we're never able to put that toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, this is I think covering a Super Bowl is just hard in general, because there's very few things that you can write that are interesting and different.
Or that aren't being told simultaneously.
Yeah, because you're right. It is like just a whole week of narratives, and like those can be fun and interesting. And like I just think about like last year's Super Bowl, Kevin Clark wrote something for The Ringer that was like just about Patrick Mahomes being great, and like that's not a unique idea, but it was really good. And I was like, oh, how did he do that? Like, how did he pull that off? That was like really, and I don't even know how to describe what he did exactly, but like he just sort of like, went into like, how Mahomes had battled through that ankle injury, which is really impressive. And yeah, so I mean, this is a week of narratives, but you can still take an obvious story and like make it interesting. It's just figuring out how. He
has a way, and sometimes the obvious thing should be said. Like, it should just be the obvious thing. You don't have to dress it up and not that Kevin doesn't write expansive or detailed things, but sometimes like he's such a great golf writer as well. And sometimes it's just about the emotion or the statement or the fact or whatever it is. It doesn't. It's just how do we feel about this? And I think that's powerful in and of itself.
Totally. Yeah.
Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, guys. This was fun.
It's going to be a busy week. We're glad you're here.
Yeah, we're looking forward to the Niners piece, unless the NFLPA shuts it down.
So
I should ask them, like, hey, what do you guys think of this?
Yeah.
I saw him yesterday, and I should have said something, but I'll call him.
Well, we'll see.
Thanks for the idea.
Kaylyn Kahler right here on San Antonio Sports Star.
Thanks, guys.
Best Bail Bonds, big game coverage live from Las Vegas. Powered by Southern Recipe Small Batch Pork Rinds, Synergenics, and 94.1 San Antonio Sports Star.